Hey, Guoba here. The title of the video may surprise you, comparing two amazing units that are quite different to each other. While I like the challenge of tackling this, so over the holidays I've been cooking simulations to test Ruan Mei versus Bronya. They are both amazing, both different, and can't really replace each other, so this is more to see when we'd want to use one over the other, and just really showcases how amazing these two units are. And you can also just use both in a team if you want. This isn't to slander a unit and isn't to be used in every case, since every single DPS is different. You may also see tons of numbers and things pop up, but don't worry, they are just there for visuals and I'll be explaining stuff very simply instead of going through the calculations one by one. So like and sub if you enjoyed this video, and sorry if my voice is a bit rough, I am sick right now. First, let's see what both units offer. Bronya offers 66% damage for one turn on her skill, with more depending on the light cone. This skill also makes her chosen unit immediately take action, meaning she could double the effective actions of a DPS with enough skill points at hand. This is what makes her special. She offers a permanent 10% damage buff with her trace, a scaling AoE crit damage buff on her ultimate, and an AoE attack percent buff on her ultimate too. Her technique also gives a short attack percent increase. Ruan Mei offers 68% damage to all allies during her skill's uptime, which she can have up permanently with ease. She can bring more with Planetary Rendezvous with an Ice DPS or with her signature upon ulting. She increases weakness break efficiency too during her skill. Ruan Mei also increases the speed of all allies permanently and then gives them resistance penetration for a couple turns after her ultimate. The buffs themselves aren't as strong as Bronya's, but then you consider Ruan Mei's own damage, coming from her talent upon breaking an enemy, and then her ultimate's marks. If we consider just the DPS's damage increase with Bronya versus Ruan Mei, it isn't very fair. Including the damage she brings on top will have to be included to represent her fully. Now let's explain the situation and how we will compare the two. I will simulate 4 scenarios. A single generic DPS with either support, then a scenario with 2 generic blast DPS with either support. The third simulation will include 2 DoT DPS, and the final one will include a follow-up oriented DPS. There are other scenarios I could include, but this shows many different reasons why one support over the other is strong. For every scenario, I do a simulation with a Ruan Mei, a Bronya at 134 speed, and a Bronya at 161 speed. The DPS on Ruan Mei's side have less speed to account for optimization with Ruan Mei's talent, so they have slightly better offensive stats. The DPS with 161 Bronya runs attack percent boots to maximize the power of this Bronya setup. Also, both supports have their signature light cones and run a 3-turn rotation. 161 Bronya runs a 4-turn rotation. Ruan Mei can't normally hit a 3-turn rotation with her signature, but we are counting external energy. 0 cycle oriented builds like 164 Bronya plus Dance and Slow Von Whack Ruan Mei were not included. So the first 3 simulations were with a solo blast DPS versus 3 targets. Again, these DPS units aren't real, they are skeletons of a DPS unit to give a generic DPS we can test with, as everyone is different. Most solo DPS should perform better with Bronya, as her action advance and buffs are just generally stronger. I also included breaks in this one, since 50% weakness break efficiency is weaker than the extra actions in a solo DPS scenario. Ruan Mei still showed a surprising 165.8% DPS increase over no buffs, showing us the base power of Ruan Mei with her high constant damage percent, ultimate res pen, and speed. When including Ruan Mei's own damage, with 4 breaks on weak enemies and 2 breaks on a high toughness boss alongside ultimate marks, Ruan Mei's damage increase goes up to 226%, showcasing how important her own damage is. After all, the team's total damage matters. Bronya on a 134 speed, tuned behind a 135 speed DPS, gave a 273% DPS increase to our DPS, showing just how strong these bonus actions can be. Note that this isn't universal for every DPS, since the multipliers and breaks are going to be different. This is also without ults being luckily timed on key Bronya turns, like having a Bronya skill plus ultimate hit the DPS's skill plus ultimate's turn, so we can expect a higher increase. Bronya at 161 speed is just behind 134 speed, but that's with the ult timings in the simulation being really favourable for this setup. I'd expect 161 to be a bit weaker, but still ahead of Ruan Mei just slightly. Also note the skill point usage in Ruan Mei teams is way lighter than Bronya teams, even if Bronya's E1 procs every single time possible, which isn't going to be the case. We can conclude from this that in most cases a hypercarry will want Bronya. If they are super skill point intensive, they wouldn't want 134 speed Bronya and would opt for a 161 Bronya with something like a Pella, or you would go Ruan Mei. If they are super skill point efficient like Blade or Jingliu, 134 Bronya is immense in power. Also, versus a single enemy or with less AoE, Bronya's power is much stronger as the damage from Ruan Mei decreases. Dual DPS is next. The second DPS is a generic blast DPS again with slightly weaker stats and multipliers, just to give the primary DPS a stronger role, and this second DPS goes skill point neutral. This is usually the case in dual DPS teams with a main carry like Jingliu or Himiko and a sub DPS like Blade or Herta. Ruan Mei is supposed to shine in dual DPS, but Bronya still has her bonus actions which are immense, and her ultimate can still buff both DPS. As we see, base Ruan Mei buffs 2 DPS to a decent amount, but Bronya will still come out ahead in either setup. But then if you include Ruan Mei's break damage, Ruan Mei's simulation wins by a small margin. 161 speed Bronya again got lucky and should be weaker, but Ruan Mei wins either way. We can conclude that Ruan Mei's power in dual DPS is better than Bronya's in most cases. Bronya can see better performance if the main carry can enable the secondary carry, like Jingliu enabling Blade's talents. The skill point usage of the Bronya's teams is just as bad as before too, so 134 Bronya is not ideal in dual DPS, and although it looks super strong, it's only super strong if you have very skill point efficient DPS, or somehow generate 19 skill points in 5 cycles. 161 Bronya does fine in skill points usage though, ideally with her E1. I next created 2 DoT DPS, both with their own multipliers, different DoT multipliers and stat lines, as one is a DoT carry and one is a DoT sub DPS. The primary DPS can detonate on skill and ultimate, and the sub DPS can only detonate their own on ultimate. The sub DPS is also skill point positive, skilling once every 3 turns. This is also versus one target. I also didn't optimize ult timings to show the difference between 134 and 161 speed Bronya. The goal of this is to show Ruan's power in dual DPS, but also now with DoT units who can't benefit from the crit damage from Bronya's ultimate, don't benefit much from the attack percent, and can't benefit from her skill's damage percent on their dots pre-Bronya E6. The result is a big 33% DPS increase for Ruan Mei over Bronya. The speed is great, the permanent damage percent is amazing, the res pen is delicious. The delays give more DoT takes overall too, and thus Ruan Mei is the better harmony for DoT teams, especially for 2 DoT setups. I'd even say that Ruan Mei is a harmony made for DoT teams, but she also excels everywhere else. Even without Ruan Mei's damage included, we can still see a 19% increase over Bronya at 134 speed, despite finishing with a very positive amount of skill points after 5 cycles. So maybe you could slot in an Asta and go no sustain. The final simulation is with a Follow Up DPS. It is similar to the DoT DPS setup, but only one unit, and is testing the power of Ruan Mei considering a Follow Up DPS that does their follow up outside of their turn, meaning the damage percent of Bronya's skill is not included here. However, they still benefit from the attack percent, more so than the DoT units, and the crit is useful too. They aren't super follow up dependent in this simulation, unlike Jingyuan though. We saw in HunterKee simulations that Ruan Mei is more favourable because of Jingyuan's emphasis on Lightning Lord. In this simulation with an okay emphasis on follow-ups, it's quite close. Bronya 134 and Ruan Mei including her break are only a bit off. 161 speed Bronya isn't too bad either, and the DPS don't have ult timings optimized. So the conclusion of this is both units are great for DPS that have extra means of doing damage outside of their turns. Bronya gives high buffs for the rest of their kit, decent buffs for the extra attacks, and action advances to enable more attacks overall. Ruan Mei offers damage percent to every instance of their damage though, which is key. So again, these simulations can't be perfectly equal to reality, and it's a generic DPS simulation, no specifics. Simulating every DPS in the game with both supports would be very difficult and very time consuming, so these scenarios instead give us a similar conclusion. Either way, in DPS guides I would generally say which harmony to opt for. So I hope you enjoyed this nerdy video, thanks to my awesome YouTube members, thanks for watching and have a good day.